The snow had no mercy. It fell in thick, suffocating sheets across the frozen wasteland that stretched endlessly beyond the stone walls of Corvaith Temple. Elara pressed her bleeding fingers against the frost-blackened wood she had been ordered to gather, her breath coming in shallow, painful gasps that crystallized in the air before her face. The cold had long since ceased to be merely uncomfortable. Now it was a living thing, a predator that gnawed at her exposed skin, that crept beneath the threadbare fabric of her dress and settled into her bones like an ancient curse. She was 22 winters old, though she looked younger. Starvation had a way of preserving youth while simultaneously destroying it. Her cheeks were hollow, her eyes too large in her thin face, ringed with shadows that spoke of sleepless nights and endless labor. Her hair, once a rich auburn that might have been beautiful if given the chance, hung in matted tangles down her back, streaked with dirt and ice. She had not been permitted a proper bath in 3 months. The Omegas of Corvaith were not afforded such luxuries. They were not afforded much of anything except suffering and the constant grinding weight of their own worthlessness. Elara had been brought to the temple when she was 7 years old. She remembered very little of the time before. Fragments, mostly. The smell of her mother's hair when she bent to kiss Elara goodnight. The sound of her father's laugh, deep and warm like summer thunder. The feeling of safety, of being wanted, of belonging somewhere in this cruel world. And then the fever had come. It had swept through their small village like wildfire, claiming half the population in a matter of weeks. Her parents had been among the first to fall. She remembered their bodies, wrapped in cloth, carried away on a cart. She remembered screaming, fighting against the hands that held her back. She remembered the silence that followed, vast and terrible, when she realized she was alone, truly alone. An Omega child with no family, no protector, no value whatsoever in a society that measured worth in strength and bloodline and the favor of the moon goddess. The temple had taken her in. That was what they told the village, what they told the few people who bothered to ask about the fate of the orphaned Omega girl. They had taken her in out of mercy, out of religious duty, out of the goodness that supposedly lived in the hearts of those who served the goddess. But Elara had learned quickly that mercy had many faces, and not all of them were kind. The temple had indeed taken her in, and then it had broken her, piece by piece, year by year, until she was nothing more than a ghost haunting the cold stone corridors, a pair of hands to scrub floors and carry water and endure whatever cruelty the priestesses deemed necessary for her spiritual education. High Priestess Morvana was the architect of Elara's suffering. She was a woman of severe beauty, all sharp angles and pale skin, with eyes the color of winter ice, and a voice that could cut through flesh when she was displeased, which was often. Morvana believed that Omegas were born sinful, corrupted by their very nature, vessels of weakness and temptation that needed to be purified through pain and absolute submission. She had made it her personal mission to purify Elara. Every morning began with prayers in the freezing chapel, kneeling on stone until Elara's knees bled. Every day was filled with impossible tasks, loads too heavy for her thin frame, standards too high for any human to meet. And every night ended with punishment for whatever failures Morvana had decided to find in Elara's work. Sometimes it was the rod. Other times it was isolation, locked in the cellar with no food or water, left to contemplate her sins in absolute darkness. Occasionally it was public humiliation, forced to stand before the other temple residents while Morvana listed her inadequacies, her fundamental brokenness, the offense of her very existence. Elara had learned not to cry during these sessions. Tears only made it worse. Morvana fed on tears like a carrion bird feeds on corpses. The other Omegas in the temple fared little better. There were 5 of them in total, though that number fluctuated as some died and others were brought in to replace them. They were forbidden from speaking to one another except when necessary for their work. Morvana said that Omegas in groups became rebellious, that they encouraged each other's worst instincts. Isolation kept them manageable, kept them afraid, kept them exactly where they belonged, at the very bottom of the hierarchy, beneath even the newest initiate, beneath even the temple dogs. Elara shifted her grip on the wood and turned back toward the temple. The building loomed before her like a tombstone, all dark stone and narrow windows, its towers reaching into the gray sky like accusations. She could see smoke rising from the main chimney. The priestesses would be warm inside, gathered around fires, eating their evening meal while the Omegas worked. Her stomach cramped with hunger. She had eaten nothing but a piece of stale bread and some thin broth in the past 2 days. Her body had learned to function on almost nothing, but it still protested, still reminded her of its needs, even when those needs could not be met. She was halfway across the courtyard when she heard it, a sound that did not belong to the wind or the creaking of frozen trees, a sound that made her stop, despite the cold, despite the risk of being seen idle. It was crying, not the harsh sobs of an adult, but something smaller, more fragile, the desperate, hiccuping wail of an infant. Ilara's head turned toward the sound. It was coming from beyond the temple walls, from the forest that pressed close on all sides. No one went into those woods after dark. Strange things lived there, things that predated the temple, that remembered when this land had belonged to the old gods and the old ways. The priestesses whispered about curses and spirits and beasts that walked on 2 legs but were not men. The villagers told stories of travelers who had entered those trees and never returned, or who had come back changed, hollowed out, with something else looking through their eyes. But the crying continued, and it was so small, so helpless. Ilara knew that sound. She knew what it meant to be alone and afraid and calling out for someone, anyone, to help. Her rational mind told her to keep walking, to deliver the wood, to forget what she had heard. Nothing good could come from investigating. Morvana would beat her if she was caught leaving her assigned task. The forest itself might kill her. And even if she found the source of the crying, what could she do? She could barely take care of herself. Yet her feet were moving before she had fully decided. She dropped the wood by the courtyard wall and moved toward the small gate that led to the forest path. Her hands shook as she lifted the latch. The metal was so cold it burned her skin. She slipped through and pulled the gate closed behind her, her heart hammering against her ribs. If anyone saw her leaving, she was dead. There would be no mercy, no explanation that would satisfy Morvana's rage. The forest swallowed her immediately. The trees grew so close together that their branches wove overhead, blocking out what little light remained in the dying day. The temperature dropped even further. Ilara's breath came in visible clouds as she pushed forward, following the sound of crying. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, echoing strangely among the trees. She stumbled over hidden roots, her thin shoes providing no protection against the frozen ground. Her dress caught on thorns and low branches, tearing, but she kept moving. The crying grew louder, more desperate. Ilara's own panic rose to match it. What if she was too late? What if whatever had been left out here had already been harmed by the cold or the creatures that hunted these woods? She broke into a clumsy run, her exhausted body protesting, her lungs burning with each frozen breath. And then she saw it. A bundle of cloth, small and dark against the white snow, tucked beneath the gnarled roots of an enormous oak tree. The crying was coming from there, muffled by fabric but unmistakable. Ilara fell to her knees beside it, her hands reaching out with a gentleness she had almost forgotten she possessed. She pulled back the layers of cloth and her breath caught. A baby, a tiny infant, perhaps only a few weeks old, with a round face red from crying and cold. The child was wrapped in what had once been fine cloth, soft wool and silk, though now it was wet with snow. Someone had left this baby here deliberately, had placed it beneath the tree's roots as if making an offering, as if hoping the forest itself might claim what they no longer wanted. Ilara's heart broke and hardened simultaneously. She knew exactly what this was. She had heard the stories, though they were spoken in whispers, as shameful secrets. When an Omega was born to a high-ranking family, when the bloodline could not afford the stain of such weakness, the child was sometimes taken to the woods, left for the elements, left for the beasts, left to die in a way that did not technically count as murder, that could be explained away as tragedy or fate or the will of the goddess. The baby was an Omega. Ilara could tell by the scent, faint but distinct, that sweetness that marked their designation. This child had been cast out just as surely as Alara had been, just in a different way, and it would die here, alone and afraid, unless someone intervened. Alara gathered the baby into her arms, holding it close to her chest. The infant was so cold, its skin almost blue, its tiny body shaking with the force of its crying. She pulled off her own thin shawl and wrapped it around the baby, trying to provide some warmth, some small barrier against the merciless winter. The child's crying softened slightly, as if recognizing that someone had finally come, that it was no longer completely alone. Something strange happened then. The baby's hand, impossibly small and fragile, reached out from the folds of cloth and grasped Alara's wrist. Its grip was surprisingly strong for something so tiny, its fingers wrapping around her arm just above her wrist. And the moment that contact was made, the moment that skin touched skin, Alara felt it. Heat, sudden and intense, radiating from the point of contact, spreading up her arm like wildfire. She gasped, tried to pull away, but the baby's grip held firm. The heat intensified, became almost painful, and then Alara saw it, a mark appearing on her skin, burning itself into existence, glowing with an otherworldly blue-white light that lit up the darkening forest around them. It was a seal. An intricate design that looked like ancient writing woven together with lunar symbols and the silhouette of a wolf's head. Alara had never seen anything like it, but some deep instinctive part of her recognized it anyway. This was old magic, powerful magic, the kind that predated the temple and the priestesses and everything she had been taught about the goddess and the natural order. The baby released her wrist, and the light faded, but the mark remained. It was etched into her skin now, permanent, a brand that she could not hide or remove. Alara stared at it in shock, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. The baby had stopped crying completely now and was looking up at her with eyes that seemed too aware, too knowing for an infant, eyes that were a striking amber color, almost golden, and that caught the last rays of daylight filtering through the trees. Alara knew she should be afraid. This was clearly some kind of curse or enchantment, something that had been placed on this child that had now transferred to her. But fear was a luxury she had spent years learning to suppress, and in this moment, all she felt was a strange sense of rightness, as if this moment had been written in the stars long before she was born, as if every moment of suffering, every year of abuse and degradation had been leading to this precise instant in this frozen forest with this abandoned child. She held the baby closer and began the long walk back toward the temple. Her mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do. She could not take the child inside. Morvana would kill it, or have it killed, without hesitation. The High Priestess had no tolerance for additional Omegas, especially infant ones that could not work. And if anyone saw the mark on Alara's arm, if they realized what had happened, the consequences would be catastrophic. She would be accused of witchcraft, of trafficking with forbidden powers. She would be executed, likely burned, and the baby would die anyway. But she could not leave the child here. That was impossible now, unthinkable. Something fundamental had shifted inside her when that mark appeared on her skin. She felt connected to this baby in a way that transcended logic or self-preservation. As if they were bound together now, their fates intertwined by forces neither of them could control or understand. The temple gate appeared through the trees. Alara stopped just outside the walls, concealed by the forest shadows, and tried to think. There was an old storage shed near the eastern wall, half collapsed and rarely used. If she could get there without being seen, she could hide the baby temporarily, just until she figured out a real plan, just until she could think clearly, instead of operating on pure instinct and desperation. She waited until full darkness had fallen, until the evening bells had rung and the priestesses had retreated to their chambers. Then she moved, staying low, keeping to the deepest shadows. The baby remained mercifully quiet in her arms, as if understanding the need for silence. Ilara's heart hammered so loudly, she was certain everyone in the temple must be able to hear it. Each step felt like walking through a nightmare, hyper-aware of every sound, every movement in her peripheral vision. She reached the shed without incident and slipped inside, pulling the broken door closed behind her. The interior was filled with rotting wood and rusted tools, thick with the smell of decay and neglect, but it was shelter of a sort, and there was old straw in one corner that was relatively dry. Alara made a nest of it, carefully arranging the material to provide insulation from the cold ground. She laid the baby down gently and tucked every piece of cloth she could find around its small body. The infant looked up at her with those strange amber eyes, calm now, almost peaceful. Alara felt tears burning in her throat for the first time in years. This tiny creature, cast aside just as she had been, was depending on her now. It was a responsibility she had no idea how to fulfill, a burden she had no strength left to carry, and yet she knew with absolute certainty that she would do it anyway. She would find a way. She had survived everything else. She would survive this too. She pulled her sleeve down over the mark on her arm, hiding it from view, and whispered to the baby in the darkness, promising things she had no right to promise: protection, safety, a future that held something other than suffering. Words that felt like prayers, though she had long since stopped believing that anyone was listening to her prayers. When she finally crept back to the temple proper, slipping into the servants' quarters where the Omegas slept in a single cold room on wooden pallets, it was past midnight. The others were already asleep, or pretending to be, each one lost in their own survival, their own private hell. Alara lay down on her pallet and pulled her thin blanket over her shaking body. The mark on her arm burned beneath the fabric, a constant reminder of what she had done, of the line she had crossed. Sleep did not come easily. When it finally did, it was filled with dreams of wolves and moonlight, and a voice that echoed through vast, empty halls. A voice that said only one word, over and over, like a promise or a warning or a prophecy: soon. The next morning arrived with the same harsh bell that marked every dawn in Corvith Temple. Alara woke with her muscles screaming in protest, her body pushed beyond its limits by the previous night's excursion into the forest. She dressed quickly in the dark, her fingers fumbling with the worn fabric of her dress. The mark on her arm was still there, still visible despite her desperate, half-formed hope that it might have been a fever dream, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and cold. She pulled her sleeve down as far as it would go and prayed to whatever might be listening that no one would notice. The morning routine was unchanging, carved into the fabric of temple life with the weight of decades. Prayers first, in the freezing chapel, with the Omegas kneeling in the back row while the priestesses occupied the cushioned benches near the altar. Morvana led the service, her voice carrying through the vaulted space with practiced precision, speaking of purity and hierarchy and the divine order that placed alphas at the top of creation and omegas at the bottom. Alara mouthed the words she had memorized years ago, but her mind was elsewhere, circling frantically around the problem of the baby hidden in the shed. The child would be hungry, would be cold. She had no food to give it, no milk, no way to properly care for an infant while maintaining her grueling work schedule. And it was only a matter of time before someone discovered her secret. The shed was not truly secure. Any priestess doing a thorough inspection of the grounds would find the baby immediately, and then both of them would die, slowly and painfully, made into examples of what happened when Omegas overstepped their place. After prayers came breakfast, if the thin gruel served in wooden bowls could be called that. Alara forced herself to eat, though her stomach was in knots. She would need her strength. Whatever was coming, she would need every ounce of energy she could muster. The other Omegas ate in silence, none of them looking at each other, each one isolated in their misery despite their proximity. There had been a time when Alara had tried to connect with them, to find solidarity and shared suffering, but Morvana had beaten that instinct out of her, along with everything else. The day's work assignments were posted in the kitchen. Alara read her name next to an impossibly long list of tasks. Scrub the entrance hall, polish the altar silver, wash all the priestesses' robes, carry water for the baths, clean the chimney in the western tower. Each task alone would take hours. Together, they represented more work than could be accomplished in a single day, even by someone well-fed and well-rested. Which was, of course, the point. The tasks were designed to be impossible, to guarantee failure, to provide justification for the evening's punishment. But today, Ilara had another concern. She needed to get back to the shed, needed to check on the baby, needed to find food, somehow, somewhere, anything that could keep the infant alive. Her mind raced through possibilities as she began her work, her hands moving automatically through familiar motions while her thoughts spun in desperate circles. The temple kitchens would be impossible. The head cook counted every scrap, kept meticulous records, would notice immediately if anything went missing. The storage rooms were locked and monitored. The priestess's private chambers were off limits on pain of severe punishment. But there might be something in the offering room, where villagers left gifts for the goddess. Food sometimes, bread and fruit and honey. Most of it was eventually taken by the priestesses, but there was a small window of time between when offerings were made and when they were collected. If Ilara could time it right, if she could steal just a little bit without being noticed, she might be able to keep the baby fed for a few days. The morning stretched into afternoon. Ilara worked with mechanical efficiency born of years of practice, her body knowing what to do even as her mind remained elsewhere. The mark on her arm seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat, warm against her skin, a constant reminder of the life now depending on her. She finished the entrance hall and moved to the altar, her fingers carefully polishing the elaborate silver pieces that decorated the shrine to the moon goddess. The irony was not lost on her. She was maintaining the symbols of a goddess who had abandoned her, who had allowed her to suffer without intervention, who had never once answered her desperate childhood prayers for rescue. It was mid-afternoon when disaster struck. Ilara was carrying water from the well to the bathhouse, her arms straining under the weight of the heavy buckets, when she passed through the western courtyard. And there, standing in conference with two other senior priestesses, was Morvana. The high priestess's pale eyes landed on Ilara, and her expression shifted into something that might have been curiosity or might have been suspicion. It was impossible to tell with Morvana. The woman's face was a mask that revealed nothing unless she chose to reveal it. Morvana raised one elegant hand, gesturing for Ilara to approach. Ilara's heart dropped into her stomach. She set down the buckets and walked forward, her head bowed in the posture of submission that had been drilled into her since childhood. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but running would only make things worse, would confirm whatever suspicions might be forming in Morvana's calculating mind. The high priestess studied her in silence for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice carrying that particular quality of cold authority that made even the other priestesses flinch. "Where were you last night, Omega?" It was not a question. It was a demand for information, spoken with the absolute certainty that Ilara would provide the truth, because lying to a priestess was unthinkable, impossible, a sin that would guarantee damnation. Ilara's mind went blank with panic. She had not prepared an explanation, had not thought beyond the immediate need to hide the baby. Now she scrambled for words, for anything that might sound plausible. "In my quarters, priestess," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sleeping." Morvana's expression did not change, but something flickered in those ice-cold eyes. "Really?" Because one of the initiates reported seeing someone near the forest gate after evening bells. Someone wearing Omega rags. You would not know anything about that, would you? The question hung in the air between them like a blade. Ilara felt sweat beading on her forehead despite the cold. If she admitted to leaving, she would be punished. But if she lied and was caught lying, the punishment would be exponentially worse. She chose her words carefully, trying to navigate the impossible terrain between truth and survival. "I went to gather fallen branches, priestess, for the fires. I thought to save the wood reserves before the next storm. It was thin, desperately thin, but it was the only explanation she could think of that might justify being near the forest gate." Morvana continued to stare at her, and Ilara could feel the scrutiny like a physical weight, like those eyes were peeling back her skin to examine what lay beneath. Finally, Morvana spoke again. "Show me your arms, Omega." The world stopped. Everything stopped. Ilara's blood turned to ice in her veins. This was it. This was how it ended. There was no way to refuse, no way to delay, no way to hide the mark that was burned into her skin. Slowly, Feeling like she was moving through deep water, Alara extended her arms, palms up. The mark was visible immediately, impossible to miss. The intricate design glowed faintly even in daylight, the wolf and moon symbols clearly recognizable, the ancient script weaving around them in patterns that suggested power and purpose. Morvana's eyes widened, genuine shock breaking through her usual composure. The other priestesses gasped, actually gasped, and took steps backward as if Alara had suddenly become something dangerous, something contaminated. Morvana grabbed Alara's wrist with bruising force, pulling her arm closer to examine the mark. Her voice, when she spoke, was filled with something Alara had never heard from her before. Fear. What is this? What have you done? Alara wanted to explain. Wanted to tell her about the baby in the forest, about how the mark had appeared without her doing anything, about how she had no understanding of what it meant or what it signified. But the words would not come. Her throat had closed, her voice lost somewhere in the tidal wave of panic that was drowning her from the inside out. Morvana released her wrist and stepped back, her face now carefully blank again, though her hands trembled slightly. She turned to the other priestesses. "Take her to the cellar, chain her, and send word to the council. They will want to see this for themselves." The other priestesses moved forward immediately, their hands rough as they grabbed Alara's arms. She did not resist. There was no point. Resistance would only result in beatings, and she needed to preserve what little strength she had left. As they dragged her away from the courtyard, down the stone steps that led to the temple's lower levels, Alara's mind raced. The council. That meant the temple elders, the highest authorities of the region's religious hierarchy. They would convene to judge her, and their judgments were never merciful. The cellar was exactly as she remembered from previous punishments. A stone room with no windows, lit by a single torch that cast dancing shadows on the damp walls. There were chains mounted into the wall, iron shackles stained with rust and old blood. The priestesses forced Alara to her knees and locked the shackles around her wrists and ankles, the metal cold and unforgiving against her skin. Then they left, taking the torch with them, plunging the cellar into absolute darkness. Alara knelt in that darkness and felt the full weight of her situation settle over her like a burial shroud. She was going to die. The baby was going to die. All because she had made the mistake of having a heart, of caring about another living creature, of thinking for one brief moment that she might be able to save something in this world instead of just enduring it. She had been a fool. Hope was for people with futures. She had no future. She had never had a future. Time became meaningless in the dark. Hours might have passed, or days. She drifted in and out of consciousness, her body's exhaustion finally claiming her despite the terror. When she woke, her throat was parched and her stomach cramped with hunger. The chains had rubbed her wrists raw. She could feel blood trickling down her hands, warm and sticky. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the anguish of thinking about the baby, alone in that shed, crying, freezing, starving, dying slowly while she was trapped here, unable to help, unable to do anything but wait for her own execution. She was not sure how long she had been in the cellar when she heard footsteps on the stairs. Multiple people, their boots echoing in the enclosed space. The door opened and torchlight flooded in, so bright after the darkness that Alara had to close her eyes against it. When she finally forced them open, squinting, she saw Morvana standing at the front of a group of 5 priestesses. All of them were staring at Alara with expressions that ranged from disgust, to fascination, to fear. Morvana spoke without preamble. "The council has reached their decision, Omega. You bear a mark that has not been seen in this region for over 2 centuries. A royal seal. The King's Seal. The Council believes you have trafficked with forbidden powers, or that you have somehow stolen a sacred artifact and used it to brand yourself in an attempt to claim status you do not deserve. Either way, the penalty is death." The words washed over Alara with a strange sense of unreality. A royal seal. The King's Seal. She knew of the king, of course. Everyone knew of the Alpha King who ruled the Northern Territories from his castle in the mountains. He was said to be ancient and powerful, more beast than man, cursed or blessed depending on who was telling the story. But his seal, his mark, appearing on a temple Omega made no sense. Unless the baby was connected to him somehow. Unless that child she had found in the forest was not just any abandoned Omega, but something more. Something that carried the king's protection, or his curse. Morvanna continued, her voice taking on a ceremonial quality now, as if she were reciting from a sacred text. You will be burned at dawn tomorrow, in accordance with the laws regarding witchcraft and desecration. Your ashes will be scattered in unhallowed ground. The goddess will not receive your soul. Do you have any final words, Omega? Alara looked up at her. At this woman who had tormented her for 15 years, who had beaten and starved and broken her in the name of religious purity, and she found, to her surprise, that she did have words. Not pleas for mercy, not explanations or justifications, just a simple truth that she had never been permitted to speak before. You are the evil here, priestess. Not me, not the Omegas you torture, not the children you abandon. You. And someday, someone will make you answer for it. The words hung in the air for a frozen moment. Then Morvanna's face twisted with rage, and she struck Alara across the face, the blow hard enough to snap her head to the side. Blood filled Alara's mouth, but she smiled anyway, her teeth stained red, because for the first time in her life she had spoken her truth, and even if it killed her, even if she burned for it, that truth had been worth speaking. The priestesses left, slamming the door behind them. Alara was alone again in the darkness. Her face throbbed where she had been struck. The chains bit into her wrists. Her execution was scheduled for dawn, but she felt strangely calm. She had done the one thing that mattered. She had tried to save that baby. Even if she had failed, even if both of them died, she had tried. That was more than most people in this world would do. That was enough. She did not know how much time had passed when she heard it. A sound that should not have been possible. Footsteps on the stairs again, but these were different. Heavier, slower, more deliberate. The door opened, but instead of torchlight, there was something else. A blue-white glow, similar to the light that had emanated from her mark when it first appeared. And in that glow, she saw a figure. He was massive, easily 7 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed to fill the entire doorway. He wore dark clothing that might have been leather, or might have been something else, something that seemed to absorb the light around it. His face was partially shadowed, but Alara could see strong features, sharp cheekbones, a jaw that looked like it had been carved from stone. And his eyes. His eyes were the same amber color as the baby's, the same impossible, knowing gold that seemed to see straight through to her soul. He stared at her for a long moment. Then he moved forward, crossing the cellar in 3 strides, and knelt before her. His hand reached out, and Alara flinched instinctively, expecting another blow. But his touch was gentle. His fingers traced the mark on her arm, and where he touched, warmth spread through her skin, pushing back the cold and the pain and the exhaustion. When he spoke, his voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together, like thunder in the distance. You found him. You protected him. Even when it would cost you everything, you protected him. And for that, little Omega, you have earned my protection in return. Alara's mind struggled to process what was happening. This man, this alpha whose presence filled the entire room with barely contained power, was the king. Had to be the king. The baby's eyes, the royal seal, the way he spoke with absolute authority, as if his words could reshape reality itself. He had come for the child, and apparently, he had come for her as well. He reached forward and touched the shackles binding her wrists. The metal glowed for a moment with that same blue-white light, and then it simply fell away, disintegrating into dust. He did the same with the ankle chains, freeing her completely. Then he stood and held out his hand to her. An offer, a choice. She could take it or refuse it. But either way, her life was about to change in ways she could not begin to imagine. Alara placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, strong and warm, And she felt that same jolt of connection she had felt when the baby grabbed her wrist. Fate. Destiny. Whatever the old stories called it. This was bigger than her. Bigger than the temple. Bigger than anything she had known or understood about how the world worked. The Alpha King pulled her to her feet. "Show me where he is," he commanded, and it was not a request. Alara nodded, her voice still lost somewhere in the enormity of this moment. She led him out of the cellar, up the stairs, through the temple corridors that were blessedly empty at this late hour. No one saw them pass, or perhaps they did, and the king's presence was such that they simply could not bring themselves to intervene, could not overcome the primal instinct that told them to hide when something this powerful moved through their territory. They reached the eastern wall, the broken shed where Alara had hidden the baby. She pushed open the door with shaking hands, praying that the child was still alive, still breathing. And there, in the nest of straw and cloth, was the infant, still impossibly calm, still watching the world with those knowing amber eyes, the eyes of its father. The king moved past her and knelt beside the baby. His huge hands were impossibly gentle as he picked up the small bundle, cradling it against his chest. The child made a soft sound, not quite a cry, more like a coo of recognition. And Alara saw something she had not expected to see on that hard, fierce face. Tenderness, love, grief, all of it mixed together in an expression of such raw emotion that she had to look away. The king stood, still holding the baby, and turned to face her. "You will come with us," he said, and again it was not a request. "You bear my mark now. You are under my protection. And more than that, you have proven yourself worthy of protecting what I hold most dear. That is not something I take lightly, little Omega. That is not something I forget." Alara wanted to ask 1,000 questions. About the baby, about the mark, about what any of this meant. But exhaustion was finally claiming her. The adrenaline that had kept her upright now draining away, leaving only the shell of her battered body. Her knees buckled, and she would have fallen if the king had not caught her with his free arm, pulling her against his side with effortless strength. The last thing she remembered before darkness claimed her was the feeling of being carried, held securely against a chest that rumbled with a sound like a growl or a purr, and the sense that for the first time in 15 years, she was safe, truly, genuinely safe, protected not by prayer or hope or the empty promises of religious authority, but by something far more primal and far more real. The bond between an Omega and an Alpha, the mark that tied their fates together, the beginning of a story that had been written in blood and snow, and the desperate, defiant act of saving a life when the cost was her own. Alara woke to warmth. It was such a foreign sensation that for several confused moments, she thought she must still be dreaming, trapped in some fever-induced hallucination brought on by cold and starvation. But as consciousness gradually returned, she became aware of other details that confirmed this was reality. The softness beneath her body, the weight of thick blankets covering her, the smell of wood smoke and something else, something wild and earthy that she could not identify. And most startling of all, the absence of pain. Her wrists did not ache from chains. Her knees did not throb from hours of kneeling on stone. Her stomach was not cramping with hunger. She felt weak, certainly, her body depleted from years of abuse and deprivation, but the constant, grinding agony that had been her companion for so long was mysteriously absent. She opened her eyes slowly, blinking against light that was soft and golden rather than the harsh gray she was accustomed to. The room around her was unlike anything she had ever seen. The walls were made of dark wood, polished until they gleamed, carved with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and move in the flickering firelight. There was a massive stone fireplace against one wall, flames crackling cheerfully behind an iron grate. Thick furs covered the floor, and the bed she lay in was enormous, with posts that reached nearly to the ceiling and curtains of deep blue fabric that could be drawn for privacy. Everything spoke of wealth and power, but also of comfort, of a place meant for living rather than simply enduring. Alara sat up slowly, her muscles protesting the movement despite the absence of acute pain. She was wearing a soft nightgown, clean and well-made, Nothing like the rags she had worn at the temple. Someone had bathed her while she was unconscious, had dressed her, had put her in this bed. The thought should have been terrifying, should have triggered all her instincts about vulnerability and violation, but somehow she felt no fear, only a strange sense of displacement, as if she had stepped out of her own life and into someone else's story. The door to the room opened without warning, and Alara flinched instinctively, her body remembering 15 years of sudden punishment even as her mind tried to adjust to new circumstances. But it was not Morvana who entered. It was a woman, perhaps in her 40s, with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical braid. She wore simple but well-made clothing, and she carried a tray laden with food. The smell hit Alara like a physical force. Fresh bread, roasted meat, fruit, cheese. Her stomach contracted so violently she had to press a hand against it to keep from crying out. The woman smiled, and there was genuine warmth in the expression. No judgment, no cruelty. Just simple human kindness that Alara had almost forgotten existed. "You are awake," the woman said, her voice soft. "That is good. His Majesty will be pleased. You have been sleeping for 2 days. Your body needed the rest." She set the tray down on a small table beside the bed and gestured to it. "You must eat slowly. Your stomach has been empty too long. If you eat too quickly, you will make yourself ill." Alara stared at the food, her hands shaking as she reached for the bread. The woman was right. She needed to be careful. But the hunger was overwhelming, a desperate thing that had been building for years. She tore off a small piece and put it in her mouth, and the taste was so overwhelming that tears sprang to her eyes. It was real bread, fresh and soft and still warm, not the moldy crusts she had survived on at the temple. She chewed slowly, forcing herself to take her time, even though every instinct screamed at her to devour everything in front of her as quickly as possible. The woman watched her with an expression that might have been pity or might have been understanding. When Alara had managed a few bites, the woman spoke again. "My name is Helena. I serve the king as head of the household staff. You are in the northern castle, in the mountain territory. You are safe here, child. No one from that temple can reach you. His Majesty has made that very clear." The mention of the king brought everything flooding back. The baby in the snow, the mark on her arm, the cellar and the chains and the sentence of death, and then him. That massive alpha with amber eyes and a presence that filled every space he occupied. He had taken her, had brought her here. But why? What did he want from her? What purpose could a broken Temple Omega possibly serve to a king? As if reading her thoughts, Helena continued. "His Majesty wishes to speak with you when you are strong enough. There is much to discuss. But first, you must recover your strength. You have been through more than any person should endure." She paused, then added more softly, "The little prince is well. He asks for you. Or rather, he fusses until someone brings him near your room. The bond between you is strong, rare. His Majesty says he has never seen its like. The baby." Alara's heart clenched. The child was alive, was here, was asking for her. She looked down at her arm, where the mark still glowed faintly beneath the sleeve of her nightgown. The bond. She did not understand what that meant, not really, but she could feel it even now. A pull, a connection, as if part of her awareness was always focused on that small life, monitoring it, ensuring it was safe. She found her voice, though it came out rough and uncertain. "The baby. Is he truly a prince? Is he really the king's son?" Helena's expression grew somber. "He is, born to His Majesty's mate, the queen. Or rather, the woman who was to have been queen. She died bringing the child into the world. It was a difficult birth, and she was not strong enough to survive it. The king was devastated, is devastated still. And then, before he could even properly grieve, before he could come to terms with raising a son alone, someone took the child, stole him from the castle in the night, and left him in those woods to die. We have been searching for weeks. His Majesty tore apart half the territory looking for his son, and then you found him. You, an Omega with nothing, risked everything to save him. Do you understand how extraordinary that is? Alara did not feel extraordinary. She felt tired and confused, and still half convinced that this was all some elaborate dream that she would wake from to find herself still chained in the cellar, still waiting for dawn and the fire. But she nodded anyway, because Helena seemed to expect some kind of response. The older woman reached out and patted Alara's hand gently. Eat more. Rest more. His Majesty will send for you when the time is right. Until then, you are to do nothing but recover. Those are his orders. She stood and moved toward the door, then paused and looked back. You did a brave thing, child. A good thing. Not many people in this world would have done what you did. Remember that, when the doubts come. Remember that you saved a life when you could have saved yourself. Then she was gone, leaving Alara alone with the food and the fire and the weight of everything she had just learned. She ate slowly, carefully, letting her body adjust to the sudden influx of sustenance. Each bite felt like a small miracle. Each moment of warmth and safety felt impossible. She had gone from sentence to death to living in a castle, from the lowest of the low to someone the king himself wanted to speak with. It was too much, too fast. Her mind could not process the magnitude of the change. When she had eaten all she could manage without making herself sick, Alara lay back down in the impossibly soft bed and stared at the ceiling. The wood beams above her were carved with wolves and moons and intricate knotwork that reminded her of the mark on her arm. Everything in this place seemed connected to that imagery. The old symbols, the ancient power. This was not just a castle. It was something older. Something that predated the temples and the priestesses and the rigid hierarchy that had defined Alara's entire existence. She must have dozed off again because the next thing she knew, the light coming through the window had changed from afternoon to evening. The fire had been tended while she slept, built up higher, and there was a new presence in the room. Alara sensed it before she saw it. That same overwhelming force she had felt in the cellar. She turned her head slowly, and there he was, the Alpha King, sitting in a chair beside her bed, watching her with those amber eyes that seemed to see everything, to know everything. He was even more imposing in better light. His face was all hard angles and sharp features, handsome in a brutal, unforgiving way. His hair was dark, almost black, and long enough to touch his shoulders. He wore simple clothing, a dark tunic and trousers, but there was no mistaking what he was. Power radiated from him like heat from a forge. This was a man who could kill without effort, who commanded through sheer presence, who answered to no authority but his own will. He spoke first, his voice that same deep rumble she remembered. You are awake. Good. We have much to discuss, you and I. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze never leaving her face. I am Theron, King of the Northern Territories, Alpha of the Shadow Peak Pack, and father to the child you saved. He paused, then added, I owe you a debt, little Omega, one that I intend to repay. Alara struggled to sit up, her body still weak, but driven by years of ingrained deference to authority. She managed to prop herself against the pillows and met his gaze as steadily as she could manage. I did not save him for payment, Your Majesty. I saved him because he was a baby, left alone to die. Anyone with a heart would have done the same. Theron's expression shifted into something that might have been amusement or might have been sadness. You would be surprised, little Omega, how few people in this world have hearts when tested. Most would have walked away. Most would have prioritized their own safety. You did not, even knowing what it would cost you, even knowing you would likely die for it. He reached out and took her hand, his grip gentle despite the strength she could feel coiled in those fingers. That mark on your arm. Do you know what it means? Alara looked down at the seal. The priestess said it was a royal seal. Your seal. But I do not understand how it got there, or why. Theron's thumb traced the mark, and Alara felt that now familiar heat spread through her skin. It is more than just my seal, he said quietly. It is a soul bond, the rarest form of connection between Alpha and Omega. It cannot be forced or faked. It appears only when an Omega performs an act of true selflessness toward an Alpha or his bloodline, risking everything with no expectation of reward. When you chose to save my son, knowing it would cost you your life, you triggered the bond. And now you and I are connected, little Omega, tied together by fate and magic, and something far older than either of us. The words settled over Alara like a weight. Connected, tied together. She had never wanted that, had never imagined it was possible. Omegas like her did not bond with alphas, especially not alpha kings. They were used and discarded. They were tools. They were nothing. Yet here was this impossibly powerful man telling her that they were connected by soul magic, by destiny itself. She found her voice, though it trembled. What does that mean, exactly? This bond? What does it require of me? Theron studied her for a long moment before answering. It means you are under my protection. Permanently. Anyone who harms you, harms me. Anyone who threatens you, threatens my house. It means you will want for nothing. Food, shelter, safety. All of it is yours by right now. And it means that I will feel your emotions as you feel them. Your pain, your fear, your joy, if you ever find it. We are linked, you and I, in a way that most people never experience. He paused, then added, It does not require you to be my mate, if that is what you fear. The soul bond is not the same as a mating bond, but it is permanent. You are mine to protect now, and I do not take that responsibility lightly. Alara absorbed this information slowly. Protection, safety, basic needs met. After 15 years of having none of those things, after a lifetime of being told she was worthless and disposable, it felt surreal, impossible, like a trap that would snap shut the moment she allowed herself to believe in it. But Theron's gaze was steady, unwavering, and there was something in his expression that spoke of absolute conviction. He meant what he said, every word. What about the baby? She asked. The prince. Will I be allowed to see him? Theron's expression softened just slightly. Not only allowed, expected. He has bonded to you as well, though in a different way. You were the first person to show him kindness, the first to protect him when the world cast him aside. Children remember that, even one so young. He will need you in his life, and I suspect you will need him as well. Purpose, little Omega, is a powerful thing. You saved his life. Now you will help me raise him, if you are willing. The offer hung in the air between them. Alara's mind raced. To be involved in raising a prince, to have purpose beyond scrubbing floors and enduring punishment, to be needed, wanted, valued. It was everything she had never had and never dared to hope for, but it was also terrifying. She knew nothing about raising children, nothing about courts or castles or the responsibilities that came with proximity to power. She was a broken Temple Omega with no education, no training, no skills beyond survival. As if reading her doubts, Theron spoke again. You will be taught everything you need to know. Reading, writing, history, court protocol. Helena will oversee your education. You will not be thrown into this unprepared. I am not a cruel man, despite what you may have heard. I do not set people up to fail. He released her hand and sat back in his chair. But I will not force this upon you. Despite the bond, despite what you did for my son, you still have choice. You can stay here, under my protection, and help raise the prince. Or you can choose a different path. I will provide you with resources, with land or gold, or whatever you need to build a new life elsewhere. The bond will remain, but you need not live in my house if you do not wish to. Alara considered this. She could leave, could take whatever he offered and disappear. Find some quiet village where no one knew her history, where she could live out her days in peace. It was more than she had ever dreamed of having. Freedom, safety, resources. But even as she thought about it, she felt that pull again. That connection to the baby, the prince, the small life that had grabbed her wrist and changed everything. She could not walk away from him, could not abandon him any more than she could have left him in the forest to freeze. I will stay, she said quietly. I will help raise him. If you truly believe I am capable of such a thing. Theron's eyes gleamed with something that might have been approval or satisfaction. I do. And more than that, I believe you are exactly what he needs. Someone who understands what it means to be cast aside. Someone who will never take his safety for granted. Someone who will love him not because he is a prince, but because he is a child who needed help. He stood, his massive frame dominating the room. Rest more tonight. Tomorrow, Helena will begin your lessons. And in the evening, I will bring my son to you. It is time you two were properly introduced. He moved toward the door, but Alara's voice stopped him. Your Majesty, why did someone take him? Why would anyone steal a prince and leave him to die? Theron's expression went cold, all the earlier warmth draining away to be replaced by something dark and dangerous. That is the question I have been asking myself since the moment I discovered him missing. Someone in my court, someone with access to the royal nursery, took my son and tried to murder him. And when I discover who, their death will be slow and painful and will serve as a warning to anyone else who might think to harm what is mine. He looked back at her, and his eyes seemed to glow with barely contained rage. But until I root out the traitor, until I can be certain my son is safe from internal threats, we must be cautious, which is why your presence here will be kept quiet for now. As far as the court knows, you are simply a new servant. Nothing special, nothing noteworthy. Do you understand? Alara nodded. She understood perfectly. There was danger here, hidden beneath the surface luxury. Someone had tried to kill the prince once. They might try again. And if they discovered that Alara had saved him, that she now bore the king's mark, she would become a target as well. The thought should have terrified her. But after 15 years at Corvaith Temple, after facing death by burning, the threat of assassination seemed almost mundane. Theron studied her a moment longer, then nodded once and left, closing the door quietly behind him. Alara sat alone in the fire-lit room, her mind churning with everything she had learned. A soul bond, a prince to help raise, a traitor somewhere in the castle, and a life that had gone from certain death to unimaginable possibility in the span of 2 days. She looked down at the mark on her arm, at the wolf and moon glowing softly against her skin. This was real. All of it was real. She was no longer a Temple Omega, no longer at Morvana's mercy, no longer counting down the hours until her execution. She was something else now, something undefined, bound to a king, connected to a prince, protected by magic that she did not understand but could feel thrumming through her veins with every heartbeat. For the first time in years, Alara allowed herself to feel something other than despair. Not quite hope. Hope was still too dangerous, too fragile, but possibility. The sense that perhaps, just perhaps, her story was not over. That the girl who had been broken and discarded might have a chance to become something more. Someone who mattered. Someone who had value beyond her designation. She lay back down and pulled the warm blankets over her thin body. Tomorrow would bring challenges. Learning and adjustment, and the constant fear of hidden threats. But tonight, she would sleep in warmth and safety. Tonight, she would let her exhausted body rest in the knowledge that she had survived, that she had saved a life, that she had somehow impossibly found her way out of the darkness and into something that might eventually resemble light. The fire crackled. The wind howled outside the castle walls, and Alara drifted into sleep, her dreams for once not filled with nightmares of the temple, but with amber eyes and a small hand gripping her wrist, and the sense that her life had finally begun. The next morning arrived with soft light filtering through the window and the smell of breakfast being brought into her room. Helena appeared again, this time accompanied by 2 younger women carrying trays and fresh clothing. The older woman supervised with practiced efficiency as they set out food and laid out garments on the bed. "These are for you," Helena explained, gesturing to the clothing. "Simple dresses, practical but well made. His Majesty wants you comfortable while you recover and learn." She dismissed the other women with a nod and sat down in the chair beside the bed. "Now, let us discuss your education. Can you read?" Alara shook her head, shame coloring her cheeks. "The priestesses never taught us. They said Omegas had no need of letters." Helena made a disapproving sound. "Ignorant cruelty. Well, we will remedy that. You will have reading lessons every morning with Brother Aldrich, the castle scholar. He is patient and kind. You will learn quickly, I suspect. In the afternoons, you will study with me. History, court customs, how to navigate the politics of this place without drawing unwanted attention. And in the evenings, you will spend time with the prince, building that bond, learning his needs. It was a full schedule, more structure than Alara had known since the temple, but of a completely different character. This was education, not punishment. Learning, not suffering. She ate her breakfast while Helena explained the details, outlining a routine that would begin today and continue until Alara had mastered the basics. When the meal was finished, Helena helped Alara dress in one of the new gowns. It was blue, the color of a winter sky, with long sleeves that covered the mark on her arm. The fabric was soft and warm, and it fit properly, tailored to her thin frame. Helena braided her hair, taming the tangles that had accumulated over years of neglect. When Alara finally looked at herself in the polished metal mirror the older woman provided, she barely recognized the reflection. She looked almost human, almost like a person rather than a discarded thing. Brother Aldrich arrived mid-morning. He was an elderly man with white hair and spectacles perched on his nose, carrying an armful of books and papers. His smile was genuine and reached his eyes, creating deep wrinkles at their corners. His voice was gentle as he introduced himself and began the first lesson, starting with the most basic letters and sounds. Alara absorbed the information hungrily, her mind starved for knowledge after so many years of enforced ignorance. The hours passed quickly. By midday, she could recognize several letters and sound out simple words. Aldrich praised her progress with genuine warmth, promising that she would be reading full sentences within a week at this rate. When he left, Helena returned with lunch and the afternoon lessons began. Court hierarchy. The various noble families allied with the northern territories. The delicate balance of power between the king and his advisors. The role of pack structure in Alpha society, and how it intersected with human politics. It was overwhelming. The sheer complexity of the world beyond the temple walls was staggering. But Helena was patient, breaking everything down into manageable pieces, answering questions without judgment. Alara found herself actually enjoying the learning, not just tolerating it, but genuinely engaging with the material. Her mind felt like it was waking up after a long sleep, stretching and testing its capabilities. As evening approached, Helena prepared Alara for what was to come. "The king will bring the prince soon," she said. "Do not be nervous. Babies sense fear. Be calm. Be yourself. He already knows you. Already trusts you. You saved his life. That is not something he will forget, even at so young an age." Alara's hands trembled as she waited. She tried to smooth her dress, to arrange her appearance into something presentable. The mark on her arm pulsed with that now familiar warmth, and she could feel that pull growing stronger. The baby was close, getting closer. And then the door opened, and Theron entered carrying a small bundle wrapped in soft blankets. The prince had grown even in the few days since Alara had found him. His cheeks were fuller, his color better. He was clearly being well cared for, fed, and kept warm and safe. But the moment his amber eyes landed on Alara, he made a small sound of recognition. His tiny arms reached toward her, and Theron's expression softened into something almost resembling a smile. "He has been fussy all day," the king said, crossing the room. "Would not settle, would not feed properly. And then we approached your door and he calmed immediately. The bond is strong, little Omega. Stronger than I anticipated." He held the baby out to her. "Hold him. Let him feel you near." Alara took the prince with shaking hands, terrified of dropping him or holding him wrong or somehow damaging this precious life that had already survived so much. But the moment the baby settled against her chest, everything felt right, natural, as if this was exactly where he was supposed to be. The prince made a contented sound and curled his small hand around her finger, his grip surprisingly strong. Tears burned in Alara's eyes. She had never held a baby before, had never been trusted with anything so fragile and important. Yet here was this prince, this future king, completely relaxed in her arms, trusting her absolutely. The weight of that trust was enormous, but somehow she felt capable of bearing it. She looked up at Theron and found him watching her with an unreadable expression. "His name is Kaelin," the king said quietly. "It means powerful warrior in the old tongue. I pray he lives up to it, that he becomes strong enough to survive the dangers of this world." He paused, then added, "My mate, his mother, chose the name before she died. It was her last wish, that he be called Kaelin, and that he grow to be worthy of our bloodline." Elara looked down at the baby, at Kaelin, and whispered the name. The prince's eyes focused on her face, and she felt that connection deepen, solidify, become something unbreakable. This child had changed her life, had given her purpose, had brought her from death to a new beginning. She would protect him with everything she had, would help him grow strong and safe, would be whatever he needed her to be. She spent the next hour simply holding him, letting him grow accustomed to her presence, while Theron watched silently. The king eventually explained the routine that had been established: wet nurses for feeding, nannies for basic care. But Kaelin would spend several hours each day with Elara, building that bond, ensuring that connection remained strong. It was unconventional, certainly. Omegas were not typically involved in raising royal children, but nothing about this situation was conventional, and Theron seemed willing to break whatever traditions necessary to ensure his son's safety and happiness. As the evening wore on, Kaelin finally fell asleep in Alara's arms, his small face peaceful and relaxed. Theron took him gently, cradling the baby with a tenderness that seemed at odds with his fierce appearance. He looked at Elara with something that might have been gratitude or respect, or simply acknowledgement of what she represented in his son's life. "You did well," he said simply. "Tomorrow, the same, and the day after, until it becomes routine, until you are as much a part of his life as breathing." He moved toward the door, then paused. "The court will be told eventually, when the time is right, when I have eliminated the threat to his life. Until then, you remain invisible, just another servant. Can you do that? Can you endure being unseen again, even temporarily?" Elara thought about the 15 years she had spent being less than invisible, being actively despised, being treated as less than human. Compared to that, being overlooked while living in safety and comfort seemed easy. She nodded. "I can endure anything, Your Majesty. I have had excellent practice." Something flashed in Theron's eyes. Not quite humor, but close. "Yes," he said. "I suspect you have. Rest well, little Omega. Tomorrow brings more lessons, more growth, more steps toward the life you were always meant to have." Then he was gone, taking Kaelin with him, leaving Elara alone with her thoughts and the lingering warmth where the baby had rested against her chest. She prepared for bed, washing with water that had been left in a basin, changing into the soft nightgown. As she lay down in the enormous bed, she thought about everything that had transpired. 2 days ago, she had been chained in a cellar awaiting execution. Now she was learning to read, studying court politics, and helping raise a prince. The world had turned upside down. Everything she had known about her place, her value, her future had been shattered and remade. And while uncertainty still gnawed at her, while fear of the hidden traitor lurked in the back of her mind, she felt something she had not felt in over a decade. She felt alive. Truly, genuinely alive. Not just surviving, not just enduring, but actually living, with purpose and possibility stretching out before her like an undiscovered country. She touched the mark on her arm, tracing the wolf and moon with gentle fingers. This bond had saved her. This connection to a king and his son had given her a second chance. She would not waste it, would not take it for granted. She would learn everything they taught her, would protect Kaelin with her life, would prove that the girl from Corvaith Temple, the broken Omega everyone had thrown away, was worth saving after all. The fire burned low, the castle settled into nighttime quiet, and Elara drifted into sleep with the taste of hope on her tongue, and the promise of tomorrow burning bright in her heart. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm that Elara had never imagined possible. Each morning began with Brother Aldrich and his patient lessons in reading and writing. Her progress was remarkable. Even he admitted it. Within 2 weeks, she could read simple texts. Within a month, she was working through basic histories and religious texts, though she found the latter difficult to stomach given her experiences at Corveth Temple. The brother noticed her discomfort and quietly shifted to more secular materials, never pressing her to explain why passages about divine hierarchy and Omega submission made her hands shake. The afternoons with Helena were more challenging in different ways. Court politics was a maze of alliances and rivalries that seemed designed to confuse outsiders. The Northern Territories alone housed 17 major noble families, each with their own agendas and claims to power. Then there were the neighboring kingdoms, the trade agreements, the military treaties, the marriage alliances that had been forged over centuries of careful diplomacy. Helena drilled her relentlessly on names and faces, on which families supported the king absolutely and which merely tolerated his rule while secretly plotting their own advancement. And always, there was the warning: trust no one completely. Everyone at court wants something. Even those who seem kind may have ulterior motives. Keep your eyes open. Listen more than you speak. Never reveal more than necessary. The castle is beautiful, child, but it is also dangerous. Never forget that. Elara took those warnings to heart. She moved through the castle like a ghost, keeping her head down, speaking only when spoken to. The other servants accepted her as one of their own, though they found her quiet even by servant standards. She worked alongside them in the kitchens and the laundry, performing tasks that were laughably easy compared to her years at the temple. No one questioned her presence. She was simply another pair of hands, unremarkable and forgettable. But the evenings belonged to Kaelin. Every night, Theron brought his son to her room, and every night the baby settled against her chest with that same contented sound. She sang to him, soft, wordless melodies that she half remembered from her own mother. She told him stories, making up fairy tales about brave children and protective wolves and kingdoms where everyone was safe and valued. And she simply held him, letting that bond between them grow deeper and stronger with each passing day. Kaelin thrived under the attention. He grew quickly, gaining weight and strength, his laughter becoming a common sound during their time together. He was an unusually aware child, his amber eyes tracking everything, missing nothing. When Elara entered a room, his entire face would light up. When she left, he would cry until someone promised him she would return. The wet nurses reported that he fed better after spending time with Elara, slept more soundly, was generally calmer and more content. Theron observed all of this with an expression that Elara could not quite decipher. Sometimes he seemed pleased, watching his son respond to her with such obvious affection. Other times he seemed troubled, as if the depth of Kaelin's attachment worried him for reasons he did not share. But he never suggested ending their evening routine. If anything, he extended it, sometimes staying to watch Elara interact with the prince, occasionally even joining in their quiet conversations. It was during one of these evenings, about 6 weeks after Elara's arrival at the castle, that Theron finally shared more of the story. Kaelin had fallen asleep in Elara's arms, and she was rocking him gently while humming. The king sat in his usual chair, staring into the fire, his expression distant and pained. His mother was Omega, he said suddenly, his voice rough. The words hung in the air like a confession. That is why someone wanted him dead. Why someone took him and tried to ensure he never reached his first birthday. Elara looked up, shocked. But you are Alpha, and a king. Surely the bloodline matters more than the mother's designation. In a perfect world, perhaps. Theron's jaw clenched. But we do not live in a perfect world. We live in one where Omegas are considered weak, corrupted, unworthy of respect or power. When I announced my intention to make Sarah my queen, half the court revolted. They said I was mad, that I was destroying centuries of tradition, that an Omega could never produce a worthy heir, that any child born of such a union would be defective, weak, a stain on the royal bloodline. He stood and began pacing, his movements agitated, controlled fury radiating from every line of his body. I did not care what they thought. I loved her. She was brilliant and kind and stronger than any alpha I had ever known. The soul bond appeared between us naturally, not forced or arranged. It was fate. Destiny. Everything the old stories claimed existed. And I would not let prejudice and small-minded bigotry deny us happiness. So we married, Theron continued, against the advice of my council, against the protests of half the noble families. We married, and for 2 years we were happy, truly happy. She made me laugh. She challenged me. She saw through all the armor and posturing to the person underneath. And then she became pregnant. He stopped pacing and looked at Kaelin, his expression softening despite the pain in his eyes. She was so excited, so hopeful that our child would prove everyone wrong, that an Omega mother could produce a strong, healthy heir. But the pregnancy was difficult from the start, Alara said quietly, remembering what Helena had told her. Theron nodded. Her body was too small, too delicate. The healers warned us that carrying to term might kill her. They suggested ending the pregnancy early, before it became too dangerous. But Sarah refused. She was determined to give me an heir, determined to prove that Omega mothers were just as capable as any other. He closed his eyes, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. The birth took 2 days. 2 days of agony. I sat outside that room and listened to her scream, and there was nothing I could do. Nothing. And when they finally brought him to me, when I held my son for the first time, they told me she was gone, that she had bled too much, that they could not save her. Alara felt tears streaming down her face. She had not meant to cry, had not even realized she was crying until the wetness touched her lips. I am so sorry, Your Majesty. That is a loss I cannot imagine. Theron opened his eyes and looked at her. For a long moment he simply studied her, as if deciding something. Then he spoke again. I had 3 days to grieve before someone took my son. 3 days to try to process the loss of my mate, my queen, the woman who understood me better than anyone ever had. And then I woke to find Kaelin missing from the royal nursery. No signs of forced entry, no evidence of struggle. Just gone, as if he had never existed, as if someone had decided that a half-Omega prince was too dangerous to live. Who had access to the nursery? Alara asked. Who could have taken him without being seen? That is what I have been trying to determine. The king's voice went cold. There were guards posted, nannies in rotation, healers checking on him regularly, dozens of people with legitimate reasons to enter that room, and any one of them could have been the traitor, or could have been working with someone else, someone more powerful, someone who wants my bloodline weakened or my rule destabilized. He moved closer to where Alara sat holding his son. That is why your presence must remain secret. Why you cannot be acknowledged publicly as his caretaker. Because whoever tried to kill him once will try again if they know he has a protector they did not account for. You are my hidden advantage, little Omega. The one piece on the board that they cannot see or predict. Alara looked down at Kaelin's sleeping face, so peaceful and innocent. What happens when you find the traitor? What happens to me and him after justice is served? Theron was quiet for a long moment. Then, justice will be served, publicly and brutally, and after that, you will be acknowledged, given a title, given the recognition you deserve for saving the royal heir. You will be able to move freely in the castle, to attend court functions, to be openly involved in Kaelin's life. But until then, we wait. We watch, we prepare. The conversation ended there, but it haunted Alara for days afterward. The thought that someone at court, someone in this castle, had tried to murder an infant because of his mother's designation, made her physically ill. She found herself studying every face she encountered, wondering if they were the enemy. That pleasant cook who always gave her extra bread. That stern-faced guard who nodded politely when she passed. That young noble who sometimes visited the kitchens to flirt with the serving girls. Any of them could be the one. Any of them could be plotting Kaelin's death even now. She became hypervigilant, her old survival instincts kicking into overdrive. She memorized faces and schedules, noted who went where and when, listened to conversations that were not meant for her ears. Helena noticed the change and approved, saying that paranoia was healthy in a place like this. Better to be overly cautious than dead. 2 months into her stay at the castle, something changed. Alara was in the library with Brother Aldrich practicing her writing when raised voices echoed from the corridor outside. The old scholar's face went pale. He stood quickly and moved to the door, listening. Then he turned to Alara with an expression of urgency she had never seen from him before. "Hide," he said simply. "Now, behind the shelves in the back. Do not come out until I tell you it is safe." Alara did not question him. Years of surviving under Morvana's rule had taught her that when someone said hide, you hid first and asked questions later. She slipped between the tall bookshelves at the rear of the library, pressing herself into the shadows, making herself as small and invisible as possible. The library door burst open moments later. Alara could not see who had entered, but she could hear them. Multiple people, and they were arguing. One voice in particular stood out, high and sharp with aristocratic disdain. The king protects that abomination as if it were actually worth something. An Omega-born child. It should have died with its mother. The bloodline is tainted now, corrupted. We cannot allow it to inherit the throne. Another voice, deeper and more measured, responded. "We have been through this, Lord Castor. The king has made his position clear. The prince is his legitimate heir. To move against the child now would be to move against Theron himself. And you know what happened to the last nobles who challenged him directly." Lord Castor's voice dripped with contempt. "I am not afraid of the king. He is obsessed with that Omega brat. It makes him weak, sentimental. We could remove the child and be doing him a favor, freeing him from the burden of a worthless heir." "You forget yourself," the other man said, though there was an edge of warning in his tone now. "This conversation borders on treason. If anyone were to hear us speak this way about the prince, we would both face execution. Then we speak more carefully." Lord Castor's footsteps moved closer to where Alara hid, and she pressed herself harder against the wall, not daring to breathe. "But make no mistake, the child must die. If not now, then soon. Before it grows old enough to display whatever defects it inherited from its Omega mother. Before it becomes impossible to remove without causing a succession crisis." The other man sighed. "And if the king discovers who took the child the first time? If his investigation leads back to us? It will not. We were careful. The servant we used has already been dealt with, and the child should have frozen to death in those woods. That it survived is bad luck, nothing more. But luck runs out. Children are fragile. Accidents happen, especially to those with inadequate protection." Alara's blood ran cold. She was listening to the traitor, the one who had stolen Kaelin and left him to die, Lord Castor. And apparently he was not working alone. She memorized every word, every inflection, barely daring to breathe lest the smallest sound give away her presence. The conversation continued for several more minutes, the two men discussing various plans for eliminating the prince without being caught. Poison was too easily detected. Another abduction would be too obvious. But an accident during a public gathering, something that appeared natural or the result of simple negligence, that might work. They needed to be patient, to wait for the right opportunity, to strike when the king's guard was down. Finally, they left. The library door closed behind them. Alara remained hidden for several more minutes, waiting to be certain they were truly gone. Then Brother Aldrich's voice called softly from the front of the library. "It is safe now, child. You can come out." Alara emerged from her hiding place, her legs shaking so badly she could barely walk. The scholar's face was grave. "You heard," he said. It was not a question, every word. Alara's voice trembled. "Lord Castor, he is the one who took Kaelin, and he is planning to try again." Aldrich nodded slowly. "This information must reach the king immediately, but you cannot deliver it yourself. If Lord Castor or his associates see an unknown servant speaking privately with His Majesty, they will become suspicious. It must be done carefully." He thought for a moment, then continued. "I will arrange an audience. Will tell His Majesty that I have discovered something in my research that requires his immediate attention. You will be present, ostensibly to help me carry books, and you will repeat exactly what you heard. Can you do that?" Alara nodded. She would do whatever was necessary to protect Kaelin, to ensure that monster never got another chance to harm him. The audience was arranged for that evening. Alara found herself in the king's private study, a room she had never entered before. It was large and imposing, with maps on the walls and weapons displayed like art pieces. Theron sat behind a massive desk, his expression impatient until Brother Aldrich explained why they had requested this meeting. Then the king's full attention focused on Alara, and she felt the weight of it like a physical force. "Speak," he commanded. "Tell me everything." Alara recounted the conversation word for word, every threat, every plan, every casual discussion of murdering a child as if it were no more significant than planning a hunt. As she spoke, Theron's expression grew darker and darker, rage building behind his eyes like a coming storm. By the time she finished, the air in the room felt electric with barely contained violence. "Lord Castor," Theron said, his voice deadly quiet. "Of course. He has opposed me from the moment I took the throne, challenged every decision, undermined every reform. And his family has strong ties to the old order, the ones who believe Omegas should be property rather than people." He stood and began pacing, exactly as he had done weeks earlier. But now his movements were those of a predator preparing to strike. The other voice, "Did you recognize it?" Alara shook her head. "I am sorry, Your Majesty. I did not know it. But it was someone Lord Castor trusted, someone he was comfortable speaking openly with about treason and murder." Theron's hands clenched into fists. Castor rarely moves without his cousin, Lord Brennan. It was likely him. And if those two are involved, there may be others. This conspiracy could be larger than I thought. He turned to face Alara fully. "You have done well. Better than well. You have given me what I need to move against them, to protect my son and eliminate this threat once and for all." "What will you do?" Alara asked. "Justice," Theron said simply. "Swift and absolute. They will not have the chance to strike again." He moved closer, placed a hand on her shoulder. "You have saved Kaelin twice now, little Omega. Once in the forest, and now here. I will not forget that. When this is over, when these traitors have been dealt with, you will have whatever you desire. Land, gold, position. Name it, and it is yours." Alara met his eyes steadily. "I want nothing for myself, Your Majesty. I want only for Kaelin to be safe, for him to grow up without fear of assassination, for him to have the childhood he deserves." Something shifted in Theron's expression. Respect, perhaps, or recognition of a kindred spirit. "You are unlike any Omega I have ever known," he said quietly. "My mate would have liked you very much. She would have been grateful that you found our son, that you protected him." He paused, then added, "Sometimes I can feel her, you know, through the bond that never quite broke, even in death. And I think she guided you to him that night. I think she knew exactly who to send to save our child." The words sent a shiver down Alara's spine. She thought of that desperate crying in the snow, the inexplicable compulsion to investigate despite the danger, the way everything had aligned perfectly to put her in that exact place at that exact moment. Perhaps it was fate. Perhaps it was the ghost of a mother still protecting her child. Or perhaps it was simply coincidence, the random chaos of the universe producing something meaningful. It did not matter. What mattered was that Kaelin was alive. And now, finally, they knew who had tried to kill him. Justice was coming. The next 3 days were tense. Theron moved with careful deliberation, gathering evidence, building his case, preparing for what was to come. Alara continued her normal routine, but she felt Lord Castor's presence everywhere now. She saw him in the corridors occasionally, a tall man with silver hair and cold eyes, surrounded by sycophants and servants. He looked at the castle staff with such obvious contempt that Alara wondered how she had not identified him as the villain immediately. On the 4th day, the king called a formal court session. It was rare enough that everyone in the castle knew something significant was happening. Nobles gathered in the great hall, dressed in their finest, speculating wildly about what announcement might be coming. Servants pressed close to the edges of the room, hoping to catch a glimpse of the proceedings. Alara watched from a hidden alcove, positioned there by Helena with strict instructions to observe but remain unseen. She could see everything from her vantage point: the assembled nobles, the king on his throne, wearing his crown and royal regalia, every inch the powerful alpha he was, and Lord Castor, standing near the front with his cousin Brennan, both of them looking confident and unconcerned. Theron stood, and the hall fell silent immediately. His presence commanded attention without effort. When he spoke, his voice carried to every corner of the vast room. "We gather today to address a crime of the highest order: treason against the crown, conspiracy to commit murder, and the attempted assassination of the royal heir." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Lord Castor's expression did not change, but Alara saw Brennan stiffen slightly, a tell that he recognized danger. The king continued, his words precise and damning. 6 weeks ago, Prince Kaelin was taken from the royal nursery and abandoned in the northern forest to die of exposure. This was not a random crime. It was deliberate, planned, executed by individuals who had access to the castle and who believed they could act with impunity because they disagreed with his bloodline. He gestured, and guards moved forward, surrounding Lord Castor and Lord Brennan. The two men started to protest, but Theron's voice cut through their objections like a blade. "I have testimony from a witness who overheard you discussing the crime, who heard you admit to taking my son, who heard you plan to make another attempt on his life. And I have evidence of payments made to the servant you used to gain access to the nursery, the same servant whose body was found in the river 3 days after my son disappeared, murdered to ensure his silence." Lord Castor's composure finally cracked. "That witness lies," he snarled. "We have committed no crime. This is a fabrication designed to remove your political opponents." Theron descended from his throne, his movements controlled but radiating menace. "The witness has no reason to lie, has nothing to gain, is not even aware of your identity or importance, but spoke true when recounting what was heard. And the evidence supports every word." He stopped directly in front of Castor. "You tried to murder my son because his mother was Omega, because you believe Omegas are weak and worthless and unfit to produce royal heirs. But you are wrong, Lord Castor. So very wrong. Because an Omega saved him, found him in the snow where you left him to die and risked everything to protect him. And another Omega has now ensured your downfall." The king's voice dropped to a growl that filled the hall. "Omegas are not weak. They are survivors. They endure what would break lesser people. They protect what matters even when the cost is unbearable. My mate was the strongest person I ever knew, and the Omega who saved my son has twice the courage of every noble in this room combined." He turned to address the full court. "Lord Castor and Lord Brennan are guilty of high treason, of conspiracy to commit regicide through the death of the heir. The penalty is death, immediate and public. Their lands are forfeit, their titles stripped. Their families will be investigated for involvement. And let this serve as a warning to anyone else who might think to harm my son because of prejudice or ambition. There is nowhere you can hide, no station high enough to protect you. Touch what is mine, and you will burn." The execution took place at dawn the next day. Alara did not watch. She stayed in her room with Kaelin, holding him close, singing softly while the sounds of the crowd and the executioner's blade echoed across the castle grounds. When it was over, when justice had been served in the most brutal and public way possible, she felt no satisfaction, only relief, and the continued, ever-present fear that there might be others, that the threat was not truly over. But Theron assured her that his investigation had been thorough. Castor and Brennan had acted alone, motivated by ideology rather than organized conspiracy. Their deaths sent a clear message to anyone else harboring similar sentiments. The prince was untouchable, protected by the king's wrath and the king's law. That evening, Theron came to her room earlier than usual. He carried Kaelin, but there was something different in his expression, something lighter than she had seen before. "It is done," he said simply. "The immediate threat is eliminated, and while I will never stop being vigilant, While I will always protect my son with everything I have, I can finally breathe. Finally allow myself to believe he might actually survive to adulthood." He handed Kaelin to Alara, and the baby immediately relaxed against her, making his happy sound. The king watched them for a moment, then spoke again. "Tomorrow, the court will be formally introduced to you, not as a servant, but as Kaelin's protected guardian, bearer of my soul bond mark, savior of the royal heir. You will be given rooms befitting your new status, a title, Lady Alara, Guardian of the Prince, and an income that ensures you never want for anything again." Alara looked up at him, startled. "Your Majesty, that is too much. I do not need titles or wealth. I only wanted to help." Theron's expression was firm. "It is not too much. It is what you have earned, what you deserve. And more practically, it ensures no one can harm you without facing severe consequences. You bear my mark. You are under my direct protection. But a title makes that protection official, makes it law. So you will accept it, little Omega. Not for yourself, but for Kaelin. Because he needs you, and I need to know you are safe enough to remain in his life." When he put it that way, Alara could not argue. She nodded slowly, her mind struggling to process this latest change. From Temple Omega to servant to Lady Guardian. From worthless to invaluable. From certain death to titles and protection. The transformation was so complete, so overwhelming, that she felt dizzy with the unreality of it all. The next day brought ceremony and spectacle. Alara was dressed in fine clothing, her hair arranged properly, the mark on her arm displayed openly for the first time. She stood before the assembled court while Theron formally recognized her service and granted her title and position. The nobles watched with expressions ranging from shock to approval to barely concealed disdain, but none dared protest. Not after what had happened to Castor and Brennan. Helena beamed with pride. Brother Aldrich looked satisfied, as if a promising student had exceeded expectations, and Kaelin, held by his wet nurse near the throne, reached toward Alara throughout the entire ceremony, calling for her in his baby voice until she was finally allowed to take him. That night, installed in her new rooms, which were larger and more comfortable than anything she had imagined, Alara sat with Kaelin and tried to make sense of her new reality. She was Lady Alara now, guardian of the prince, protected by royal decree, safe in ways she had never been safe in her entire life. The temple seemed like a distant nightmare, something that had happened to someone else. She looked down at the baby prince, at this child who had changed everything, and felt that bond pulse warm and strong. Whatever came next, whatever challenges awaited, she would face them. She had survived Corvaith Temple. She had survived assassination plots and court intrigue. She would survive whatever else this strange new life threw at her. Because she was not weak, she was not worthless, she was a survivor. An Omega who had endured the unendurable and come out the other side not broken, but tempered, made stronger by the fire. And that strength would be Kaelin's shield, her protection his armor, her love his foundation. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, it was also full of possibility, and that was enough. 5 years had passed since that frozen night in the forest. 5 years since Alara had found a dying infant and changed the course of her entire existence. The castle had become home in ways she never thought possible. The corridors she once crept through as an invisible servant now welcomed her as Lady Guardian, respected and valued by nearly everyone at court. Kaelin had grown into a bright, energetic child with his father's amber eyes and his mother's gentle spirit. He was curious about everything, constantly asking questions that challenged even Brother Aldrich's vast knowledge. He was kind to the servants, fascinated by the castle animals, and absolutely devoted to the woman he called his Mara, his special word for Alara that meant something between mother and protector. The bond between them had only strengthened with time. Alara could sense when he was troubled or afraid even from across the castle. Kaelin sought her out for comfort after nightmares, for celebration after achievements, for the simple reassurance that she was there and would always be there. She taught him letters and numbers, told him stories about brave Omegas and just Alphas, and carefully shaped his understanding of a world that had tried to reject him before he could even speak. Theron watched their relationship with an expression that had softened considerably over the years. The fierce, grieving alpha who had rescued Alara from the cellar had not disappeared, but he smiled more now, laughed occasionally, allowed himself moments of peace instead of constant vigilance. He and Alara had developed an easy partnership built on mutual respect and their shared devotion to Kaylin's well-being. The soul bond between them remained, a constant warmth beneath Alara's skin, but it had evolved into something comfortable rather than overwhelming. They understood each other in ways that required few words. He trusted her judgment completely when it came to his son. She trusted his protection, absolutely. On the 5th anniversary of Kaylin's rescue, Theron organized a small private celebration. Just the 3 of them in the king's private chambers, away from court formality and political performance. Kaylin sat between them, chattering excitedly about the new pony he had been promised, while Alara and Theron exchanged amused glances over his head. After the child was taken to bed by his nurse, Theron poured 2 glasses of wine and handed one to Alara. "To survival," he said, raising his glass. "To second chances. To the Omega who saved everything that matters." Alara touched her glass to his. "To the king who recognized worth where others saw only weakness. To the prince who reminded us both what we were fighting for." They drank in comfortable silence. Then Theron spoke, his voice thoughtful. "I have been thinking about the future, about what happens as Kaylin grows older, about what he will need beyond our protection." Alara waited, sensing this was leading somewhere significant. "He will need to understand both sides of his heritage," Theron continued. "The alpha strength from my bloodline, but also the Omega resilience from his mother's. And there is no one better suited to teach him that balance than you." He met her eyes. "I want to make this official. Not just guardian, but regent. If something should happen to me before he comes of age, you would rule in his stead until he is ready. You would have full authority to protect him and guide him." The words stunned Alara into silence. Regent. That was power on a scale she had never imagined. The authority to rule a kingdom, even temporarily. It was trust beyond measure. "Your Majesty, I am not qualified to rule. I know nothing of military strategy or economic policy or—" "You know what matters," Theron interrupted gently. "You know justice. You know compassion. You understand what it means to survive impossible circumstances and come out stronger. And most importantly, you would always put Kaylin's interests first, not your own ambition. That makes you more qualified than half the nobles at this court." Alara looked down at her hands, at the mark that still glowed faintly on her wrist, the mark that had bound her to this family, this fate, this impossible life. "You honor me beyond words," she said quietly. "If you truly believe I could serve in that capacity, then I accept. For Kaylin. Always for Kaylin." Theron smiled, genuine warmth in his expression. "Then it is decided. The documents will be prepared tomorrow." He paused, then added more softly, "Thank you, Alara, for everything you have given us, everything you continue to give. My mate chose well when she guided you to our son. I believe she would be proud of the woman raising him." Tears burned in Alara's eyes, but they were not tears of pain. Not anymore. They were tears of gratitude, of belonging, of having found purpose in a world that had tried so hard to convince her she had none. Later that night, Alara stood at her window looking out over the moonlit castle grounds. Somewhere far to the south, Corvaith Temple still stood. Morvana still terrorized Omegas in the name of divine order. The world had not fundamentally changed. Injustice still existed. Cruelty still flourished. But here, in this castle, in this small corner of the world, things were different. Here, an Omega stood as Lady Guardian and future regent. Here, a half-Omega prince would grow up knowing his worth was inherent, not determined by designation. Here, the old hierarchies were being quietly dismantled and rebuilt into something better. Alara touched the mark on her wrist, feeling its warmth pulse in time with her heartbeat. She thought about the terrified girl who had stumbled through the snow 5 years ago, who had chosen compassion over self-preservation. who had reached out to save a dying child even though it meant her own death. That girl had been right. The choice had been worth it. Every moment of fear, every challenge, every painful adjustment to this new life had been worth it, because she had saved Kalen. And in saving him, she had somehow saved herself. The future stretched ahead, full of unknowns and challenges, but Alara no longer feared it. She had survived the worst the world could offer, had climbed from the deepest pit to stand in the light, and she would use that strength, that hard-won resilience, to ensure that Kalen never had to suffer as she had, that he would grow up safe and loved and valued. She was Lady Alara, guardian of the prince, bearer of the king's mark, and survivor of Corvaith Temple. She was Omega, yes, but she was also so much more. She was proof that designation did not define worth. That strength came in many forms, that even the most broken among us could rise, could matter, could change the world. And that was a legacy worth building, a story worth living, a future worth fighting for. The moon rose higher, the castle slept, and Alara stood watch, as she always would, protecting the small family that had become her entire world. The girl from the temple was gone, burned away in the same fire that would have killed her body. In her place stood a woman who knew her value, who understood her strength, who would never again allow anyone to make her feel worthless. She was home. She was safe. She was needed. She was enough. And that was everything.